Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The wind howled through the empty streets of Eldrannor, a magical city once filled with life and light. Now, its skies were heavy with dark clouds, and shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, creeping and crawling over every surface. Liam pulled his cloak tighter around himself as he hurried through the narrow alleyway toward the city's grand library, the only place where he felt truly at home. For as long as he could remember, the library had been his refuge, a place where the vast tomes of knowledge waited to be discovered. But tonight, something else seemed to linger in the air, something dark. Liam was an apprentice, barely 2 years into his training, but his curiosity always pushed him further than most. His fellow apprentices joked that he would be a master before the rest of them could conjure a proper flame. He liked that reputation, but it came with a cost. His need to learn, to explore every forbidden corner of the library, often led him into trouble. He'd been warned about the restricted section more times than he could count. His mentor, Master Valen, had been particularly stern about it. Some knowledge is best left forgotten, Valen had said, his voice heavy with warning. There are books in this library that were never meant to be opened, especially not by those who aren't ready for the consequences. Liam had nodded obediently at the time, but the pull of the unknown was too strong. He had to know what lay behind the locked doors of the restricted section. The thought gnawed at him, growing louder with every visit to the library. Tonight, after weeks of careful observation, he finally knew how to slip in unnoticed. The heavy wooden door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old parchment. Rows upon rows of ancient books lined the walls, their spines cracked and faded from centuries of neglect. Liam's heart raced. He knew he shouldn't be here, but his hands moved before his mind could stop him. He reached for the first book that caught his eye, a thick, leather-bound tome that seemed to pulse with a faint, dark energy. As soon as his fingers touched it, a cold shiver ran through his spine. He hesitated for a moment but shook off the feeling. With a deep breath, he opened the book, its pages worn and fragile. Strange symbols filled the text, ones he had never seen before. His fingers traced the markings, and as he did, he felt something stir in the air around him. The room grew colder, and the faint glow of the torches dimmed. Suddenly, the symbols on the page began to shift, twisting and turning as if they were alive. Liam's eyes widened as the air grew thick with an unnatural energy. He tried to close the book, but his hands wouldn't obey. The words on the page started to form a chant, whispering into his mind, dark and seductive. Before he could stop himself, the words slipped from his lips. Oris Temnor Vorax. The moment the chant left his mouth, the world around him seemed to tremble. Shadows pooled at his feet, writhing and twisting like living creatures. The book pulsed with a deep, malevolent energy, and a voice, cold and ancient, whispered in his ear, "You've awakened us." Panic surged through Liam as he stumbled back, the book falling from his hands. Dark tendrils of shadow spread across the floor, snaking toward the walls and seeping into the very stone of the library. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding as the shadows grew, taking on monstrous forms. He had to get out. He had to find Master Valen. Liam raced through the library, his footsteps echoing in the now silent halls. The shadows followed, faster than they should have been, as if they had a mind of their own. As he burst through the main doors and into the cold night air, he saw it, darkness creeping across the city, swallowing the light. His heart sank. What had he done? By the time Liam reached Master Valen's chambers, the city of Eldrannor was in chaos. The once bright streets were filled with panicked citizens, their faces pale with fear as they fled from the encroaching shadows. Creatures, born from the darkness, slithered and crawled through the streets, feeding on the fear and chaos. Liam pounded on Valen's door, his knuckles raw from the effort. "Master Valen. Open up." The door swung open, and Valen stood there, his face grim, eyes heavy with the weight of what he had already sensed. Without a word, he pulled Liam inside, closing the door behind him. The old mage's study was filled with books, scrolls, and magical artifacts, but tonight, the usual warmth that came from the crackling fire was absent. Instead, the air was cold, and the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. Even here, Valen turned to Liam, his voice quiet but firm. "What have you done?" Liam's heart pounded in his chest, guilt flooding through him. I found a book. In the restricted section. I didn't mean to." "I didn't know, you didn't know?" Valen's voice rose, anger flashing in his eyes. "I warned you, Liam. I warned you about that place. Some knowledge is too dangerous for anyone to wield, especially an apprentice. I'm sorry, sorry won't stop what you've unleashed." Valen's voice softened as he turned away, his gaze falling on the dark tendrils of shadow visible through the window. "The Book of Darkness. I thought it had been lost long ago. But if you found it," Liam swallowed hard. "Can we stop it?" Valen's expression darkened. "The book is tied to an ancient sorcerer, one who wielded the power of darkness to try and conquer the world. His essence is bound within the book, and now that you've awakened it, his power will grow. The darkness will consume everything unless we find a way to destroy it." Liam's stomach twisted. "How do we destroy it?" Valen shook his head slowly. "It won't be easy. The book is bound to you now. It's tied to your soul. Destroying it means facing the darkness within, and that's a battle not many have won." "I have to try," Liam said, his voice trembling but resolute. Valen nodded, his gaze softening for a moment. "Then we'll need help." The road to redemption was not one Liam would walk alone. The next morning, after a restless night filled with nightmares of creeping shadows and dark voices, he and Valen set out to find the allies they would need. Valen knew of a powerful sorceress, Isolde, who had long studied ancient magics, some of which were rumored to be as old as the Book of Darkness itself. Isolde lived on the edge of the forest, far from the city, in a tower surrounded by enchanted thorns that kept unwanted visitors away. As they approached, Liam felt a cold chill creep up his spine, but Valen walked confidently to the door, rapping sharply on the wood. Moments later, the door creaked open and Isolde stood before them. She was younger than Liam had expected, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders, her green eyes sharp and calculating. "I sense something dark stirring," she said without preamble, her gaze locking onto Liam. "You're the one who unleashed it, aren't you?" Liam hesitated, guilt flooding through him again. "Yes. I didn't mean to, no one ever means to," Isolde said, cutting him off. "But intentions don't matter. What matters now is stopping the darkness before it consumes everything." She glanced at Valen. "You brought him here because you think I can help?" Valen nodded. "We need the sigil of light." Isolde raised an eyebrow. "The sigil of light? That's not exactly something you just pick up at the market." "We know," Valen said quietly. "But it's the only thing that can counter the Book of Darkness." Isolde's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze flickering back to Liam. "You realize what you're asking, don't you? The sigil is hidden deep within the caverns of the Forgotten. Even if you find it, there's no guarantee it will work. And getting there, many have tried. Few have returned." Liam swallowed hard, but his resolve didn't waver. "I have to try." Isolde studied him for a moment before nodding. "Very well. But don't think I'm doing this out of charity. If we succeed, you'll owe me a favor, apprentice." Liam nodded, though he wasn't sure what kind of favor someone like Isolde would ask for. The journey to the caverns of the Forgotten was perilous, filled with dangers Liam had never imagined. The land around Eldrenor had already begun to succumb to the creeping darkness. Shadow creatures roamed the forests, their red eyes glowing with malevolent hunger, and the air itself seemed thick with an oppressive weight. Isolde proved to be a powerful ally, her magic weaving shields of light that repelled the shadow creatures long enough for them to escape. But even she couldn't prevent the growing darkness from affecting Liam. The further they traveled, the more the darkness seemed to cling to him, whispering in his ear, tempting him with promises of power. Liam tried to shake off the whispers, but the dark presence lingered in his mind, wrapping itself around his thoughts. It offered him control over the shadows, over the very forces that now threatened to destroy everything. His hands clenched into fists as they continued deeper into the forest, where the entrance to the caverns was said to lie. Isolde glanced at him from time to time, her eyes sharp with suspicion. She knew the darkness was trying to take hold of him. He could feel her studying him, waiting for a sign that he was succumbing. Valen, too, seemed more distant, his face lined with worry. Liam couldn't blame them. He had brought this upon them all. Every step felt heavier than the last, but he pressed on, forcing himself to focus on the task ahead. The mouth of the caverns of the Forgotten loomed before them, a jagged crack in the earth that seemed to swallow the light. Liam felt an icy wind rush out from the depths, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers, not unlike the ones he had been hearing since he opened the Book of Darkness. These whispers, however, were different. They were voices of warning, ancient and filled with sorrow. They echoed through the caverns, carrying tales of those who had entered before and never returned. "We're close," Isolde murmured, her voice barely audible over the wind. She tightened her grip on her staff, her magic flaring as a shield of light briefly surrounded them. Valen gave a curt nod and stepped forward, leading the way into the cavern. As they descended, the air grew colder, the darkness more oppressive. Their torches flickered weakly, as though the shadows were devouring the light. The walls of the cavern were slick with moisture, and strange markings etched into the stone seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Liam's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of the place pressed down on him. This was no ordinary cavern. It was a place where light had been banished long ago, where the darkness had claimed dominion over all. The path twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the earth. Shadows danced on the walls, shifting in ways that made Liam's skin crawl. He felt the darkness inside him stir, as if recognizing its kin. His breath quickened, and he forced himself to focus, clutching his staff tightly. Every step was a battle against the growing temptation to give in, to let the darkness guide him. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the heart of the caverns, a vast chamber where the sigil of light was said to be hidden. But they were not alone. In the center of the chamber stood a figure cloaked in darkness, his form shifting and indistinct. His eyes, two pinpricks of red light, fixed on Liam. The air around him shimmered with a malevolent energy, and Liam knew instantly who it was, the sorcerer. "Foolish boy," the figure hissed, his voice echoing through the chamber like 100 voices speaking at once. "Did you think you could undo what has been set in motion?" Liam's breath caught in his throat as the sorcerer's presence filled the room, oppressive and overwhelming. He had known this moment would come, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer power radiating from the dark figure. The sorcerer stepped forward, his form solidifying as he drew closer. His face was gaunt, his skin pale as death, and his eyes burned with an unnatural fire. His voice was a low, dangerous whisper. "The darkness is mine, apprentice. You have awakened it, and now it will consume you, just as it consumed me." Liam's hand instinctively moved to the book at his side, the very book that had caused all of this. The leather felt cold against his skin, a reminder of the mistake he had made. But he couldn't turn back now. He had to destroy the book, had to stop the darkness before it consumed everything. "You can't stop this," the sorcerer continued, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "The darkness has already taken root. You are bound to it, just as I am. But there is a way, boy. Embrace it. Take the power that is offered to you. With it, you could rule over this world, bend it to your will." Liam's mind raced. The temptation was palpable, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. The sorcerer's words held a dark allure, promising power beyond his wildest dreams. But then he glanced at Isolde and Valen, their faces filled with determination, and he remembered why they were here. He remembered what he had done, the lives already lost because of his actions. "I won't let the darkness win," Liam said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his insides. The sorcerer's smile faded, replaced by a look of disdain. "Foolish child. You cannot defy what is already part of you." The ground beneath them trembled as the shadows began to shift, coalescing into monstrous forms. Liam could feel the dark power rising, surging toward him. But then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it, a faint glimmer of light in the far corner of the chamber. The sigil of light that he had no time to think. Valen and Isolde were already moving, their magic flaring as they fought to hold back the advancing shadows. Liam bolted toward the sigil, his heart pounding in his chest. The light was faint, almost drowned out by the overwhelming darkness, but it was there. It was hope, the sorcerer's voice echoed behind him. "You can't escape me, boy. You will fall, just as I did." Liam reached the sigil of light, his fingers brushing against the cool stone surface. For a moment, he hesitated, the darkness within him stirring violently, resisting the touch of the light. He felt the sorcerer's presence closing in, felt the cold fingers of shadow reaching for him, and then, with a surge of determination, he grasped the sigil. A blinding light erupted from the stone, flooding the chamber and pushing back the darkness. The shadows screamed as they were burned away, and the sorcerer recoiled, his form flickering as the light consumed him. Liam could feel the darkness inside him writhing, trying to tear free. The book at his side pulsed with a dark energy, fighting against the light. But he held on, his grip tightening on the sigil as he forced the darkness back. It was a battle unlike any he had ever fought, a battle for his very soul. He could hear the sorcerer's voice, faint and distant now, filled with rage. "You cannot destroy me. The darkness will always return." Liam's vision blurred as the light grew brighter, burning through him. He could feel the darkness slipping away, piece by piece, as the sorcerer's grip on him weakened. And then, with one final surge of light, the darkness shattered, the chamber fell silent. Liam collapsed to his knees, the sigil of light still clutched in his hand. The air was clear now, the oppressive weight of the darkness gone. He looked around, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The shadows were gone. The sorcerer was gone. Isolde and Valen approached, their faces etched with relief. But there was a sadness in their eyes as they looked at Liam. "You did it," Valen said softly, his voice filled with both pride and sorrow. "You destroyed the darkness." Liam nodded, but he felt hollow inside. He had won, but at what cost? The Book of Darkness lay at his side, its power drained, but the weight of what he had done still hung heavy on his soul. "You'll carry this with you," Isolde said, her voice gentle. "But you saved the world, Liam. You saved us all." He didn't feel like a hero. He had unleashed the darkness, and it had taken everything in him to destroy it. But as he stood, the sigil of light still glowing faintly in his hand, he knew that he had done what was right. The road ahead would be long, and the scars of this battle would never fully heal. But the darkness had been defeated, and for now, that was enough.